Hello and welcome to What Goes Bump Tonight.
Is there life after death? Yes.
Oh, what? Ooh, what the?
Oh my god, is my shirt moving right now?
Why should we be afraid of you?
Hello and welcome to What Goes Bump Tonight. I'm your host, Riley Clark, and today we have a very special episode where we will be bringing back the Artificial Pasta series. Now, this series is stories written completely by AI, and all of the images you are going to be seeing in this video were generated by AI, which is kind of crazy because it is very, very creepy, and I just be warned, okay? Now, without further ado, here's the Doll of Torment 2.
John Walker wiped sweat from his brow, the oppressive heat of the attic pressing down on him. Dust swirled in the dim attic light, creating ghostly patterns in the air. He coughed, waving a hand through the musty air, the scent of old memories filling his lungs. He was searching for his grandfather's old toolbox, a family heirloom that had been passed down through generations. Instead, his hand bumped against something cold and smooth, sending a chill up his spine. It was a porcelain doll lying forgotten in a dusty trunk, its presence both unexpected and unsettling. John lifted the doll. It was eerily lifelike, almost as if it were watching him. Its porcelain skin was flawless, painted with rosy cheeks and delicate eyelashes, a stark contrast to the decaying surroundings. But it was the eyes that held him captive, piercing blue and unnervingly lifelike. They seemed to follow his every move, an unblinking gaze that sent a shiver down his spine. They glinted in the half-light, a sinister glimmer that made his heart race. He set the doll down, unnerved by its lifelike presence. The toolbox was buried deeper in the trunk, hidden beneath layers of forgotten relics. John pulled it out, his heart still pounding from the encounter with the doll, the sense of unease growing stronger. He closed the trunk, eager to leave the stifling attic and the doll's unsettling presence behind. As he turned to go, he thought he heard a faint whisper, a sound that made his blood run cold. It seemed to come from the doll, its lips unmoving, yet the whisper unmistakable. "Find me if you dare," it seemed to say, the words echoing in the silence. John shook his head, trying to dismiss the voice as a figment of his imagination. He hurried down the attic stairs, the image of the doll's piercing blue eyes burned into his mind, the whisper still lingering in his ears. He tried to shake off the unsettling feeling, telling himself it was just the heat playing tricks on him, but the unease remained. But deep down, a seed of unease had been planted, a feeling that something was terribly wrong. The next morning, John tried to forget about the doll. He went about his day, fixing cars at his shop. The metal felt cool and reassuring under his calloused hands. He found solace in the familiar rhythm of his work, the clanging of tools, the smell of oil and gasoline. But when he returned home that night, the unease returned. He found himself drawn to the attic, an inexplicable force pulling him closer. The doll sat where he had left it, its blue eyes gleaming in the darkness, almost alive. He couldn't explain the pull he felt, the morbid curiosity that drew him to the doll. He reached out a hesitant hand, his fingers brushing against the smooth porcelain, feeling a strange warmth. Just a doll, he muttered to himself, trying to convince himself it was nothing more, but the words rang hollow in the silence of the attic, the air thick with tension. As he stared into the doll's eyes, he felt a chill crawl down his spine, the room growing colder. The whispers returned, this time clearer, echoing in the stillness. "Feed me," the doll seemed to hiss, its voice cutting through the darkness. John recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest, the fear gripping him tighter. He stumbled back, knocking over a dusty lamp in his haste to escape the attic, the shadows closing in around him. John tried to rationalize the voice. He told himself it was just the wind whistling through the cracks in the old house. He tried to ignore the whispers, to pretend he had imagined it all. But the doll's presence was overwhelming. Its gaze seemed to follow him everywhere he went. Sleep offered no escape. He was plagued by nightmares, the doll's blue eyes burning into his soul. He would wake in a cold sweat, the whispers echoing in his ears. "Feed me," the doll demanded. its voice growing stronger with each passing night. John's work suffered. His hands, once steady and sure, now trembled. He made mistakes, his mind clouded by the doll's incessant whispers. His customers noticed his change, their concern growing into suspicion. John withdrew further, isolating himself in his home, his only companion the porcelain doll that held him captive. One night the whispers became unbearable. "Feed me!" the doll shrieked, its voice echoing through John's mind. "Blood! Give me blood!" John stumbled back, clutching his head. He couldn't take it anymore. The doll had to be silenced. Driven to the brink, John did something unthinkable. He pricked his finger with a needle, letting a single drop of blood fall onto the doll's porcelain lips. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. John felt a momentary relief. But then he watched in horror as the doll's lips seemed to curve into a grotesque smile. The silence was short-lived. The next day, the whispers returned, more insistent than before. "More," the doll hissed. "I need more." John was trapped. He had become a prisoner in his own home, his life ruled by the sinister whims of a porcelain doll. His fear morphed into a twisted sort of obedience. Each day the doll's demands grew more bizarre. He began to resent the doll, yet he couldn't escape its hold. The doll's whispers were relentless. He was caught in a macabre dance, his every move dictated by the doll's insatiable thirst. John's world shrank. His days were consumed by the doll's demands, his nights haunted by nightmares. The doll's voice echoed in his mind, the line between reality and delusion blurred. John could no longer tell what was real. He became a recluse, his only contact with the outside world, the occasional trip to the store for supplies. And always the doll was with him, its blue eyes watching his every move. The sense of dread never left him. Desperate to break free, John decided to get rid of the doll. He drove for miles, the doll lying on the passenger seat, its blue eyes seemingly mocking his attempt at defiance. The road stretched endlessly, each mile amplifying his anxiety. Finally, he stopped at a deserted bridge. With trembling hands, he hurled the doll into the river below. The splash echoed in the silence, a momentary relief washing over him. He had escaped, or so he thought. He drove back home, the silence deafening yet welcome. The absence of the doll's presence was a balm to his frayed nerves. He slept soundly that night, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. But his newfound peace was shattered the next morning. The air felt heavy, charged with an unseen menace. He woke to find the doll sitting on his chest, its blue eyes burning into his. Its porcelain skin was damp, a single drop of water rolling down its cheek like a tear. The room seemed to close in on him. The whispers returned, angrier, more demanding. "You cannot escape me," the doll hissed. "You are mine." The words echoed in his mind, a sinister chant. John was devastated. He realized with chilling certainty that he was bound to the doll, tethered by a force he couldn't comprehend. The weight of his fate pressed down on him. He was no longer in control. The doll owned him, body and soul. Fear turned into a grim acceptance, a surrender to the inevitable. John resigned himself to his fate. He would serve the doll. He would feed its hunger no matter the cost. Each act of servitude eroded his will. His soul was already forfeit. Now it seemed his humanity would follow. The transformation was complete. He was the doll's servant in body and spirit. The doll's demands grew more frequent, its thirst unquenchable. John's initial revulsion at the bloodletting faded, replaced by a chilling numbness. He was no longer the man he once was. The doll had twisted him, reshaped him into something monstrous. He began to hear the doll's whispers even in his waking hours, guiding his actions, dictating his thoughts. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, drowning out his own voice. The line between his will and the doll's became increasingly blurred. He was a puppet, dancing to the tune of a malevolent master. Each day, the doll's grip tightened, pulling him deeper into its sinister embrace. His once warm brown eyes turned cold, reflecting the doll's vacant stare. His hands, once skilled and strong, now trembled with a constant need to satiate the doll's thirst. The transformation was slow but relentless, eroding his humanity bit by bit. He was a shell of a man, his humanity slowly being consumed by the darkness that clung to the porcelain doll. The townsfolk, once accustomed to John's friendly demeanor, now avoided him. They whispered among themselves, their fear palpable. His vacant eyes and unsettling demeanor sent chills down their spines. Whispers of the mad mechanic of Millfield spread like wildfire, painting John as a recluse, a pariah in the town he had once called home. The legend grew, feeding off the fear and unease that now surrounded him. The doll's hunger escalated. No longer content with John's blood, it demanded more. It craved the life essence of others. At first, John resisted, but the doll's whispers became threats, promising unimaginable torment if he disobeyed. He became a predator, stalking the shadows, his victims chosen at random. Each life he took brought a temporary respite from the doll's torment, a brief silence to the incessant whispers. But the guilt, the horror of his actions gnawed at the remnants of his soul. The first kill was messy, John's hands clumsy with fear and revulsion. The doll's whispers spurred him on, urging him to complete the ritual. The blood, so bright and vibrant, seemed to appease the doll, its porcelain skin taking on a faint, sickening glow. With each subsequent kill, John's humanity chipped away, replaced by a chilling detachment. He became a phantom, feared and whispered about, his name synonymous with the terror that gripped the once peaceful town of Millfield. The build-up to each kill was agonizing. John would lurk in the dark alleys, a shadowy figure, his heart pounding with dread and anticipation. The eerie sound of his own footsteps echoed in his mind, a constant reminder of the horror he was about to unleash. His victims' fearful eyes, their trembling hands and desperate attempts to escape only heightened the intensity of the moment. The doll's sinister whispers grew louder, more insistent, driving John to the brink of madness. Each kill left John's hands stained with blood, the doll's eyes glowing with sinister satisfaction. The once peaceful town of Millfield was now a place of nightmares, its residents living in constant fear of the phantom that stalked their streets. Millfield, once a haven of peace and tranquility, was now shrouded in fear. The townsfolk, once accustomed to the quiet rhythms of rural life, now bolted their doors at night, their hearts pounding with every creak and groan of their old houses. The shadow of the mad mechanic loomed large, casting a pall over their once idyllic existence. His presence was felt in every dark corner, every whisper of the wind. The local newspaper, once filled with mundane happenings, now screamed headlines of the gruesome discoveries. Each new edition brought fresh horrors, deepening the town's collective dread. The sheriff, a portly man named Howard, was out of his depth. He paced his office, his face etched with worry, clutching at straws, desperate to restore order to his town. His nights were sleepless, haunted by the faces of the missing. Rumors of a curse spread like wildfire. The townsfolk whispered about the old Walker house, its windows dark and lifeless. They spoke in hushed tones, afraid that even the walls had ears. They spoke of John's grandfather, a man rumored to have dabbled in the occult. The town was gripped by a fear it couldn't explain, a creeping dread that seeped into their bones. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat, as the sinister whispers grew louder and more insistent. The doll, its porcelain skin now stained crimson, demanded the ultimate sacrifice. "Bring me the girl," it hissed, its voice dripping with malice. John knew who it meant. Emily, the baker's daughter. Her innocence a stark contrast to the darkness that consumed him. John hesitated. A flicker of his old self, the John Walker who once valued life, flickered within him. The weight of the doll's demand pressed heavily on his soul. He knew what he had to do. He had to stop the doll, even if it meant sacrificing himself. The thought of Emily's fate gnawed at him, but he steeled his resolve. He lured Emily to his house, his heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. Each step felt like a march towards doom. He would end this reign of terror, even if it was the last thing he did. The air grew colder, the shadows deeper as he prepared for the final confrontation. He owed Millfield that much, owed it to Emily and to the memory of the man he once was. The echoes of his past mistakes haunted him, urging him to make things right. As Emily stepped into the house, her eyes wide with innocent trust, John made his stand. The tension in the air was palpable, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the dread. He lunged at the doll, his hands trembling. He would destroy it, even if it killed him. The final battle had begun, and there was no turning back. But it was too late. The doll let out an ear-piercing shriek, a sound that seemed to pierce the very fabric of reality. The air crackled with a malevolent energy, thick and suffocating. John cried out as he felt a searing pain course through his body, as if his very soul was being torn apart. He looked down in horror to see his flesh twisting, contorting, morphing into something monstrous. His screams echoed through the room, mingling with the doll's sinister laughter. The doll tumbled to the floor, its porcelain features now twisted into a grotesque parody of a smile, mocking his agony. It had won. John, his body now a monstrous amalgamation of flesh and porcelain, was no more than a puppet, a vessel for the doll's evil. His mind screamed in silent torment. Emily screamed, her voice a desperate plea for escape. She ran from the house, the image of John's grotesque transformation seared into her memory, a nightmare she could never wake from. She would never forget the horror, the sheer evil that had twisted a man into a monster. The memory haunted her every step, a shadow she could never outrun. Millfield remained a town draped in shadow, forever haunted by the mad mechanic and the porcelain doll that had orchestrated his downfall. The air itself seemed to whisper of their malevolence. John's monstrous form, eternally bound to serve the doll's whims, became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered from generation to generation. His fate was a grim reminder of the darkness that lurked within, and the doll's sinister laughter echoed through the empty halls of the Walker house, a chilling reminder that some sins can never be absolved. The house stood as a monument to eternal torment, a place where nightmares were born.
Keep your ears and eyes open high.